Okay, welcome back to video 2 in our series on clinical trial reimbursement. I'm here again with Joe Popowitz from Emergent CRO, Carla Monticelli from JD Lyman, and Dr. Chuck Stemple, former medical director at Humana and part-time medical director at JDL Access, and I'm Kim Norton, CEO of JDL Access. So in this video, in video 1, we introduced the concept of clinical trial reimbursement, talked a little bit about how it works, especially from a CMS perspective. Dr. Stemple reminded me I did want to mention that Medicare, from a Medicare perspective, clinical trial reimbursement is also referring to Medicare Advantage. So we're talking about both Medicare and Medicare Advantage following those same rules. And then Dr. Stemple will talk about commercial payers in the next video. So in this video, we're going to talk to Carla a little bit more and to the whole group about how companies, medical device companies, should think about clinical trial reimbursement from a strategic perspective. So Carla, maybe you can just give us a high-level overview of when you are talking to your medical device clients, what are the things that they're asking? What are the things that they should be thinking about when they want to come to you and say, hey, you know, we have an IDE planned. Should we bill in the study? How do you typically advise them, and what are the watchouts?
Sure. Good question. We get asked that quite a bit. And we think about it from our perspective of there's 3 main questions we start with, right? And because anybody, if you have a Category B IDE, you can bill in the clinical trial for Medicare and Medicare Advantage. But if you think about it, should we, as you said, I think about the payer mix. So is it a heavy Medicare population, or is it more predominantly a commercial payer population? Because as you said, we're going to talk a little bit more about commercial payer clinical trial reimbursement, which is a whole different journey. So we look at the payer mix. We look at the speed to enrollment and the burn rate. So again, just because you can bill sometimes, and Joe, you can comment on this too, I think how much do sites like to bill in the trial versus have the sponsor reimbursing them for the trial and the costs? And I'm sure you'll touch on that a little bit. And where does the delay come in, and what does it do to the burn rate, as well as then the patient copay? So if I start first with the payer mix, we tend to lean heavily into the probably not worth doing if it is a low Medicare payer mix, because Medicare is the only for sure that you can go if they've given you the Category B IDE designation and CMS has blessed your protocol. So if you're heavy commercial, to me, that's a gating factor. Very few things override that because it will impact your burn rate and your speed to enrollment. And that tends to be the second gating factor from, these are startups in most cases, right? So, and again, that's probably the rubric that we deal mostly with, are the startups to the mid-size, not the large organizations that maybe can have a longer burn rate. And the other thing I would add is the patient copay. Patients are obligated to pay copays in the clinical trial, so it's not free for them. And I've only seen 2 opinions from the OIG that have allowed companies to pay the patient copays, but otherwise they're on the hook for the 20% under Medicare if it's in the hospital outpatient, or in the ASC if it's uncapped, or in the inpatient, whatever the inpatient copay amount is capped at.
So Carla, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
So when would a company be best served to engage with you in this process? Because I know for us, when we're talking about, you know, the planning and the burn rate, when is it a good time for a device company to start to talk to you about that process?
Same time they're talking to you, Joe. You know, very early. Doesn't necessarily need to be a long process, but being aware of the trade-offs, I think, are so important because it's a business decision at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And Carla, kind of to follow on that question, when you're talking about kind of percentages of Medicare versus commercial, do you have a line that you draw? Is it just sort of study by study? Is it, you know, it has to be at least 50% Medicare? How do you look at that?
Great question. I think it varies. You know, the no-brainer decisions to me are 85% Medicare and maybe 15%, right? You're predominantly right. Medicare. There's a trade-off. That right. 50-50 mark, Other consultants may disagree. That makes me a little more hesitant unless I could find some commercial plans who were willing to engage in paying for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about, maybe there is a path forward, but where it gets a little bit more complicated is that 65 to 85%, right? And then it's fact, I layer in then maybe the next level of how expensive is the copay for the patient. Where are my sites going to be located? Are they institutions that just don't want to bill for Medicare, even if they can, because they've got a whole shop set up to bill the sponsor and they prefer that? Those are some that come top to mind. So it's multifactorial and there's no one percentage, but I love the easy ones, 85% and above for me.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly any company can bill for the routine care, right? So the decision we're talking about is both that and or billing for the device. So if you're talking about, sorry, Dr. Simple, go ahead.
Yeah, and Carla, do most companies come to you with an understanding of what would be considered routine care versus just the device, or is that something you help the companies to define? What an MA plan, or even, I know we're going to talk about commercial, but as I think about a company setting up their budget, do they have a pretty good understanding? Well, this would be considered the investigational trial piece, so we're not going to get reimbursed for it. This would be standard of care, therefore we are going to get reimbursed, or does that come into the considerations at all?
It does, and I think we see a wide variety of how sophisticated the companies are. Certainly more today understand the difference of routine care, and they're typically engaged with a company like Joe's that's also helping define that by the time they come to us. It's less common for them to come and not understand some sort of what the standard of care is today than when we started in this business 30 years ago. But
Okay.
There are still companies who don't.
Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Good question. And I should amend my earlier statement to say any company with IDE reimbursement approval can bill for the routine care. So Carla, last question, I promise. I would imagine that if a company's thinking about billing for the device in the clinical trial, there are a number of things they have to think about and consider from a coding and a pricing perspective. So for example, if they already have a Category III CPT code, could that potentially help them gather claims to support moving to a Category I code? Does that get counted toward utilization for a Category I code? Or, for example, how to think about establishing a price for the device in the clinical study. In general, how do you tend to counsel device companies around those issues, or how do you think about those issues?
We tend to look at each case individually. So if there's a Category III code, what we would first probably do is look and go, are there any claims in the system and what is being done? Do we like what's being done? And say we pivot away from it or lean into it, depending on how close it is to describing the device. And it's not a standalone one and done question of we have the code, we don't have the code, and then we need a code, right? It ties into the overall strategy, the endpoints. Will the sites actually submit appropriate claims? So the long story short is we really look at it as an individual basis and how does it impact your payer mix? What would it do to coverage policies in the future? What does it do to the copays? All of that. And let's be clear, Category III codes don't come with physician payment, so it doesn't help on that side. It's only in the hospitals.
Yeah, and I have to believe that the unique nature of all these devices, it really is important to engage with a group like yours, Carla, early in this process, because you need that guidance, I would assume, to navigate the process well.
Yes. And we pride ourselves on not having a cookie cutter approach. We really want to weigh all the pros and cons across the spectrum and partner with a group like yours and going, are we missing anything? And do we have an understanding of routine costs versus the cost of the device? And what are the trade-offs and implications?
Helpful. Okay, great discussion. Thank you. So let's end this here, and then next week we will dive into some interview questions with Dr. Stemple to follow on what we talked about, but appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.